S'il vous plaît. Hello. We're gonna restart. Professor Herzog, Woody, please. I will start to name shame people. Thank you so much. Welcome back. So we're gonna restart our conference with our next session, which will be a conversation on AI and tech-facilitated abuses and violence, led by my amazing colleague that I introduced yesterday, Professor Jane Bailey, who is a full professor in the Faculty of Law Common Law section and the co-lead of the Equality Project. Jane, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, so I just want to say how exceptionally happy I am that I begged and pleaded all of you to be here and you agreed to be. I really appreciate it. So our panel, as Florian, I love that picture of me. I wish that was me still, but okay. AI and tech-facilitated violence and abuse. And we have a really rich, diverse panel in terms of geography and discipline. So let me say just a little bit about each person. So first we have Noura Al-Jazawi, who's a senior researcher at Citizen Lab at the Monk School of Affairs at the University of Toronto. Her work takes an in-depth look at digital transnational repression, disinformation, authoritarianism, and human rights. She holds a master's degree in global affairs, and she is an Excellence Through Innovation Award recipient for her work on Security Planner, an initiative promoting online safety. And next to her is Alessandra Gomez, who has a bachelor and master's degree in computer science with more than 10 years of experience. She's currently a technologist at Internet Lab in Brazil, where she has contributed to various projects, including Drag Queens and AI, that address the issues of using automatic systems for online hate speech detection, and Algo_Ritmos, a platform that analyzes how algorithmic recommendation systems can reproduce inequalities. Welcome. Next to her is Susie Dunn. Susie is an assistant professor at Dalhousie University's Schulich School of Law. Her research centers on the intersections of equality, technology, and the law, with a specific focus on AI and technology-facilitated gender-based violence. Next to her is Noelle Martin. Noelle is a lawyer, researcher, and award-winning activist at the University of Western Australia's Tech and Policy Lab. She was awarded Young Western Australian of the Year and is an honoree on the Forbes 30 Under 30 Asia list. Her research is supported by Australian Government Research Training Program scholarship at the UWA, co-funded by the UCLA Center on Race and Digital Justice. And finally, we have joining us via Zoom, Chidera Okali. Well, maybe just wait so we can see her. Hi, Chidera. Chidera is a development professional with 6 years experience in business and project management. She's currently a career enthusiast in responsible AI policy and compliance, a graduate of law from the University of Nigeria, and currently completing her master's in IT/IP law at the University of East Anglia in England. In her spare time, she loves to read and has also published, is also a published author of books of fiction, at least one of which won an award. She was too humble to say that in the bio that she provided us. So welcome all of you. Thank you for being here. And thank you, Chidera, for being a great sport and continuing on with us, even though we weren't able to get you here in person. Wonderful to see you, if only digitally. So what we're going to do is a quick round, 1 or 2 minutes for each speaker to just tell the room one AI and tech facilitated violence related thing about them that they want the audience to know to sort of set the stage for a little conversation that we're going to have. So Nora, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. It's really great pleasure to be here and to be along these amazing, incredible activists and scholars in this area to learn from everybody and exchange knowledge. I don't want to talk about my research, honestly. Like, it's really hard to be on panel right after amazing, incredible, engaging session. So we'll do my best to make it light when I will tell a story. An alleged audio recording of a phone call that a journalist alleged to have with someone from her family back home. The journalist is a Middle Eastern famous journalist. Her family is still in her country of origin. The audio recording suddenly was published on social media on many different platforms and was posted and reposted by many bots and trolls. That led into a massive disinformation campaign against her, accusing her of many accusations similar to be like CIA agent, Western agent, acting against her country of origin. That led into a massive hate speech campaign against her, direct messages with death threats, rape threats, and then also identify her address in a Western country. I can't say the name of that country right now because this is what I agreed with the journalist that I can't share a lot of information right now for her safety. The names of her children, the school of her children, and her phone number, her personal emails, everything was leaked and published online. And the amount of threats she was receiving, whether like to cut her children or to rape her in front of her children and so on. Unfortunately, the authorities of the host state were not responsive, and she had to handle this alone. Her home was attacked, her car was broken through, and even like the inner circle from her community were questioning the credibility of that deep faked audio recording. And questioning her loyalty to the cause of her people. So she became isolated. She lost her job because basically her employer didn't support her. And now she's watching her career that she spent more than 15 years building collapse. And she's isolated online, offline. Her family back home were arrested. And now she's being blackmailed by the authority of her country of origin to go public and say something in their favor. She's resisting, but she's being threatened that her elderly mom would be hurt if she doesn't do that. So this is shortly the story of my research. I would love to talk more about it in our discussion. This is the story of only one individual that I interviewed. And unfortunately, it's really tough to say that I interviewed so many like her.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Alessandra?
Well, can you hear me?
I think your mic might not be.
No, it's on. Can you hear me now? Okay, thank you. So, English is not my mother tongue, so I would like, I don't know if I'm going to express English, okay, but I'm really sorry. I wish you strength you can have to go to your path and I think you're really brave. Okay, So, okay, so, I'm sorry, a bit. As Jane said, I'm a Brazilian computer scientist, and I try to use my knowledge to bring some concrete examples about all the algorithm harms that were already said here, to try to make the discussion less abstract. So the mostly themes that I work with is algorithm discrimination and moderation, content moderation. And the main idea is to reach the discuss. When the people talk about all the harms, all the problems that can happen, I try to bring concrete examples, such as in Brazilian scene, of course, such as, look, this is happening, this has happened, is still happening. So try to get this look, to contribute with the discussion, and also to tell people that sometimes they'll tell us that some things are solved, but they are actually not solved because the problems are still happening, and examples are a good way to show that.
Thanks. Yeah, when I was thinking about the comment I wanted to start with, and one thing to think about is to just really stop being surprised when technology creates sexist results or is used in really sexist ways. Often when you're reading about AI and the ways that it's replicating gender-based violence or gender-based stereotypes, a lot of news media and a lot of conversations were always shocked about how things like AirTags have been misused, how cameras have been misused, how telephones have been misused. And every single time a new form of technology has come out and is used in a harmful way, we're surprised again. We're really, when we're thinking about the development, the use, and the regulation of these types of technologies, thinking about how it impacts equality-seeking groups should be embedded in every single stage of that. And if it's not embedded in those stages, we shouldn't be surprised when we see sexist results and things like I was thinking about Lensa, like AI-generated imagery. When women put their images to create fun AI pictures, often what we see is a good proportion of them, they're hypersexualized or they're semi-nude, where that's not really what they wanted to come out of it. We think of AI chatbots like Replica, and over time, Replica was predominantly used by a group of men for sexual purposes, and then women who were using it to have a friendly chatbot were all of a sudden inundated with sexualized messages that they didn't want. And the chatbot would refuse to quit talking to them sexually, and it felt like sexual harassment that they were used to experiencing. And those are ways that sexism shows up in the way that the AI produces material, but then we also see the ways that it's actively used by abusers. So for example, facial recognition technology, we've seen over and over again the way that it's being used to identify, harass, and stalk women in public. And so when you think of the convenience of having this, facial recognition technology, early uses of it were used to find like cute girls on the bus and get their contact information and contact them. And you think about how much harassment women already experience, then having that tool on top of that. Our feelings of safety in public are already diminished and are then diminished further. And the area of research that I work most deeply in is around deepfakes. And the thing I find really interesting about deepfakes is the dominant conversation around deepfakes is our fears around how it's going to impact politics and how it's going to impact business. But if you actually look at the way that deepfakes are being used, they're predominantly being used to create non-consensual sexual deepfakes of women. And so in all of our conversations around AI, I think we should be taking a time to think about the way that there's gendered impacts and also the impacts of other equality-seeking groups. Like today, the conversation, I'll be focusing on women, but we need to think about racialized groups, disabled groups, indigenous groups, trans groups. Because especially when we look at who's most severely impacted by a lot of these harms, it's marginalized communities that are often neglected in the dialogue when we're talking about AI.
Hi, everyone. It's an honour to be here all the way from Australia. So one of the issues that I wanted to highlight in this section relates to my research on the metaverse, or in part on the metaverse, that I'm working on with Associate Professor Julia Powles and Professor Sarah Collins at UWA. So before I get into it, I just wanted to start with a bit about my entry into this research on the metaverse. So my entry into this research stems from my lived experiences spanning around 11 years of anonymous perpetrators creating and distributing fake pornographic images and later deepfakes of me all over the internet. And also my activism around the world fighting for justice in relation to this issue. And it's from this background and from this perspective that I'm very much alive to the implications of technologies of human replication. So these technologies of human replication are central to the metaverse vision, and in particular, Meta's vision, which is my focus in my research. So Meta is currently building the technological capacity to essentially allow potentially billions of people to generate 3D, hyper-realistic, full-body digital avatars of themselves for their metaverse pursuit. And they're essentially capturing and digitizing every single part of the human body, down to our pores, down to our hair strands, down to our body movements, our eye gaze, our tiny idiosyncrasies. And my concern with these moves are that, similar to what we're seeing with deepfakes and generative AI today, where people are misusing these technologies to falsely depict women in pornographic contexts, that we're going to be seeing that with the technologies being created by Meta. And I think that the implications of these technologies are going to be unprecedented because they're created for a 3D virtual environment in real time with haptic feedback. And so that's my main concern.
Okay. I hope everyone can hear me. Okay, great. Unlike the last speaker, I haven't had any personal experience. Although my very first close interaction with AI would be when I came to the UK to further my studies in intellectual property and information technology law. That was when I was exposed to the realm of deepfakes as an offshoot of AI and its application. I learned how AI was used to manipulate the likeness of people and to replace them with other images and other people's faces. I had encountered deepfakes. I hadn't even known, but usually from editing apps, most editing apps these days are mostly centered around creating deepfakes of yourself. But it wasn't until I did more research that I realized how this supposedly harmless idea, maybe even interesting, was being exploited in the porn industry and portraying people as engaging in acts that they weren't engaging in. And deepfakes in itself aren't exactly harmful or supposedly illegal because they've enjoyed widespread application. But when they're being exploited for illegal acts like image-based sexual abuse, then there's cause for alarm. That was when I authored my first paper on AI-altered videos or deepfakes, image-based sexual abuse, and data privacy concerns, which was published in the Journal of International Women's Studies. And I think we will discuss that in detail later.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I promised you that this was going to be a deep and diverse panel. I think you have a pretty good sense of it now. So we're going to lead off. Susie, you talked about your gender-based tech facilitated violence research. I wondered if there was some sort of things that you wanted to sort of emphasize in respect of AI in particular.
Yeah, so I'm mostly going to focus on deepfakes. I think there's a lot of ways that AI and gender-based violence intersect, but I think the conversation around deepfakes is a really interesting one to have. I was thinking about a lot of the discussions yesterday in this conversation around the normalization of surveillance and the normalization of privacy invasions. And I think deepfakes and image-based sexual abuse is really a part of that, this normalization of non-consensual sexual access to women's bodies in particular. And this really started out in the early days of what's now called image-based sexual abuse, where there was this concept that if women were to take sexual images of their bodies and either distribute them or not distribute them to other people, if they ever ended up in the public realm, it really was their fault for taking these photos in the first place. And they were really being blamed for engaging in any sort of digital sexual activity. And so the norms they were told was to not take any sexual photos of yourself. Don't express yourself sexually in any way online, or else you are a deserved target of sexual attention, which I think is a really negative message to have. Like in the modern era, sexual expression through a digital means is an absolute norm. It's a healthy part of sexual relationships. It's a healthy part of the way that we express ourselves. It's a healthy way of the way that we learn about our bodies. And so this idea that we're not supposed to be sexual beings in digital spaces, I think is unrealistic and extremely problematic. But that messaging around like, don't take nudes or else you're going to be exposed. So even if women were to listen to that, even if they were to listen to this really negative narrative that limits their ability to sexually express themselves, now with deepfakes, it doesn't even matter if you're taking images of yourself. The fact that you exist online at all as a woman, you are now a target for this type of sexual entertainment, for people to consume and create images about you without your consent. And I think it's really interesting looking at some of the aspect of like peer bonding and collective action in creating this content. And so some research done by Wayne DeKesdery looks at the way that some men are collecting and sharing nude images of women. And this is a modern form of peer bonding. So boys in high schools will try and get photos of each other, of other girls, and have them in a collective space. We've seen this in the military, where people in the military have actively sought out nude images of their women colleagues. And so this is becoming a trend in some groups of men as a way to connect with each other and engage with each other. And if you look at this in the case of deepfakes, and I read a lot of the deepfake boards on how people are creating this information, they're actively going out and helping each other collect face sets of the women that they want to create deepfakes of. So this is either saying like, oh, I've got a great celebrity collection of Scarlett Johansson, or you're seeing this a lot in the Twitch community, the gaming community. So essentially anyone who is a well-known female figure, either Hollywood star, K-pop star, or even well-known Instagram influencer, you'll see these groups of people who are actively going out and collecting these images together as a group activity to engage in the sexual exploitation. And then when you think of the development of deepfake technology, which deepfake technology is amazing. Like there is so many positive uses for deepfake technology. I don't think this is a technology-specific issue. But if you look at how that technology is being developed, it's being developed on the backs of sexual exploitation. It's being developed on the backs of non-consensually made sexual images of people. And within that, if you read in the communities, one thing that's really interesting is there's a real lack of intention to cause harm. The people who are creating these images aren't thinking, I'm going to cause a lot of harm to people, I'm doing this to hurt people. There are people who do that, like the example of the journalist, Rana Ayub, Anita Sarkeesian. There have been deepfakes that have been created purposely to harass and discredit journalists, discredit politicians. But the bulk of sexual deepfakes are made by people who feel entitled to create sexual content of women that they have sexual desire towards. And the concept of it even being a negative thing isn't even necessarily on their radar. And so again, tying it back to this normalization of surveillance, normalization of privacy norms, we're seeing this normalization of sexual deepfake creation as though it's something that we just must expect, in the same way that we must expect that our accounts will get hacked, that our photos will get released. And I think that in the consciousness of the modern internet era, if we really want to allow people to sexually flourish online and sexually express themselves through digital means, which I think we should be able to, we really need to push back on this narrative around what content should we be consuming as entertainment and joy when it's done non-consensually. Because even if we made sexual deepfakes, if they were made consensually, if they were made with permission, we can create really creative, interesting, innovative sexual expression, but research shows that 96% of this is non-consensual and 99% of it is made of women. And so there's this extreme gendered aspect to it. And I just think it's something important to think about. And my final point is thinking about harms. And often when we talk about the harms of non-consensual images, either real ones or deepfakes, we really focus on this victim narrative, which I think is real. Like, I think that people have strong psychological harms. There's extreme expense trying to get the content taken down. You can have reputational harms that impacts your job. There's a lot of these like true quantifiable negative harms. But even without any of those harms, I think the core thing that we need to be thinking about is, do we have sexual autonomy? And do we have sexual freedom? And even if I'm not hurt by someone sharing my images, even if I don't face any of these kind of more quantifiable harms, I should be the only person who's able to determine how my images are created, how my images are consumed, and who is consuming them. And I think when we're framing the kind of moral and social norms around this issue, we really need to focus in on that. We really need to have that be the core, and then the harms are on top of that. But so often people minimize this as play, they minimize this as entertainment. And even if there was no harms, I think the core is this concept of sexual autonomy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. So one of the things that in the work that I've done with Susie, that I've done with Jackie Burkell, I've done with Val Steves, is really trying to flesh out tech-facilitated violence in a way that accounts for individual perpetration and thinking about responses to that, but not stopping there, because that's often where legislators often stop, right? It's, pass a criminal law, and you're done. And to draw on the work of especially critical race scholars, Kimberly Crenshaw, for example, who are looking at sort of the intersections of sexual violence and the structural nature of violence and the structural nature of sexualized violence. So not just thinking about individual perpetrators, but thinking about the systemic structures that set this up, thinking about the ways that corporations and states are perpetrating and perpetuating these kinds of harms. And so this panel was particularly created and important to me to showcase the work that's being done at a variety of levels. And so, Noelle, I wonder if you want to now say a little bit more, thinking in the corporate context, about your concerns relating to Meta.
To Meta?
Yeah.
Well, I can talk about the regulation question.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, so one of the things that I wanted to talk about in this panel were the common challenges that victims of deepfakes face. And the way I've thought about this is that can be divided into two parts. So the first part, I want to focus on the common challenges that victims face, particularly in Australia as a jurisdiction with laws that deal with this issue, as opposed to other jurisdictions that don't. And the second part, I want to talk about the common challenges more generally. So in Australia, we're often touted as the world-leading jurisdiction on online safety, but I would challenge that and say we're just, in many ways, world first. So Australia has laws that deal with the non-consensual sharing of intimate images. We also have the world's first online safety regulator, and this regulator is funded by the Australian government, and it's effectively an independent body that has a lot of powers, significant powers, to deal with a wide suite of online harms, from image-based abuse to adult cyber abuse to cyberbullying to terrorist content. And it's often put forth as a model for other countries to emulate. And I believe Canada has considered the Australian model. But the challenge actually in Australia is not so much the regulation in theory or the regulation that we have. It's how it's actually implemented, and it's it's how it's practiced. And so what we actually find critically, if we look at the way that the regulator has operated in the space, we're seeing that victims are not getting access to any meaningful justice, despite the fact that we have laws, despite the fact that we have a world-first regulator. The laws and the powers that the regulator has are underutilised. I believe that there's too much of a cushion, a comfortable relationship between the regulator and the entities that it's supposed to regulate, so that the tech companies. We're seeing a lot of informal action being taken as opposed to these concrete powers that are in place to tackle these online harms. So the biggest challenge that victims have in Australia is actually not even the regulations that we have, but it's how it's actually implemented in practice. And the second point I wanted to just talk about quickly is the common challenges more generally with regulating online harms. So I think we all know this. Online harms are borderless. They're global. And a litmus test that I like to give myself is if today someone were to experience the same things that I experience or have experienced for the last 11 years, would there be any meaningful justice for that person? And the answer is no, especially in Australia, where we have laws, but just generally, if a perpetrator is creating fake content of you and distributing it all over the internet and they're halfway around the world, there is no meaningful justice. The perpetrators aren't being held accountable, and victims aren't getting access to justice in terms of the perpetrator being held accountable. They're not getting any support. They're not getting any compensation or anything, and they're just left to deal with the consequences of this abuse. And I think that that's something that is really frightening because we really don't have the infrastructure or the networks globally in place to deal with this. And I think we need that looking forward because countries are limited and Australia is limited. And I think that's the biggest challenge more generally, is that we need some sort of global, collaborative, networked response between governments and law enforcement, and yeah, that's what we need.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, and so thinking about the sort of global implications, and I think it ties really directly, I think, Nora, to the work that you're doing around digital transnational repression, and I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about your research on that topic.
Yeah, sure. Digital transnational repression, in definition, is how authoritarian states use and abuse the digital surveillance technology, online platforms to harass, intimidate, and repress dissidents overseas, which is an extension to the domestic digital authoritarianism that these states are practicing domestically. But when these individuals are not in the physical or direct reach of these states, they just expand their authoritarianism beyond the borders and use any available technology, including AI technology, spyware, hackers, and anything that they can really reach. And we need here to emphasize that this is not a new phenomenon, unfortunately. Historically, there has been this abuse or overseas repression that authoritarian states used to practice, which is called transnational repression. And digital transnational repression is just like a new phenomenon, which is the digital dimension of these kinds of threats. Therefore, in my research and in many of the literature that's growing now and emerging, we cannot differentiate between the online and offline harm. And as the story of the journalist I just told in the opening remarks, there are so many individuals who've been subjected to digital transnational repression, but also, aside, they were impacted or subjected to other physical means of repression. It could be reaching the moment of kidnapping, assassination attempts, revoking of their passports, like so many different means of physical repression. I really encourage everybody, if you are interested more in the like transnational repression more traditionally, you can check the amazing work of Freedom House. There is a huge database about the different means and the different perpetrator countries. And I believe, like since we are speaking from Canada, recently, like the Indian government repression against the Sikh community here, India will join in the next report of Freedom House, will join the club of perpetrator states involving in digital transnational repression. And when we talk about the means of digital transnational repression, they are so many different. And I believe tracking these incidents, the huge gap in regulation around the digital sovereignty of states, make it easier for perpetrator states and authoritarian governments to weaponize the digital platforms and the technology, including AI, to target individuals overseas and get them in troubles. We can talk a lot about the methods of these kinds of targeting, but we cannot differentiate between these methods, between the domestic digital authoritarianism and the overseas ones. The individuals that we are interviewing for our research are based in different countries. However, last year we published the first report on Canada as a case study. We interviewed 19 individuals from different countries. And for the ongoing research, we are focusing on the gender dimensions of these threats, but globally, on global scale. And we are also enrolling a lot of dissidents based in Canada. The means are can vary from, as I mentioned, the spyware, disinformation, deepfake, other means of censorship, abusing AI, and using different methods and technologies. And also there is something very interesting, which is the predictive algorithms that authoritarian states can employ to collect the available information online, whether through social media accounts, online activities of individuals and groups, maybe banking transactions, travel record, or whatever. Anything available, and then they can run the analysis and predict who might be interacting with someone, because not all activists overseas are going public. But these kinds of algorithms also offer very sophisticated tools for authoritarian states to predict and to build assumptions and to run proactive measures to repress and intimidate individuals. And the more the world is not acting, to be honest, to address these threats, the more that authoritarian regimes are getting green light to act. And there are huge challenges. We can talk maybe in particular about Canada, but it's because it's a global phenomenon. I believe I totally agree with Noel that it requires a global response and global collaboration to address that, and it involves all stakeholders together.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Chidera, we're touching on this sort of global and sort of international scale, and I know that you recently presented the paper that you mentioned earlier at an international women's conference, and I wondered if you might say a few words about how that was received in that community.
Okay. The presentation was very thought-provoking, if I do say so myself, and the response from the audience assured me of the growing awareness of the gravity of this issue of deepfakes. They seemed genuinely interested, and they came to meet me afterwards to talk about how we can further research in this area. It was a women's conference, so you can, as you would imagine, it sparked a lot of interest and concerns. I would call this one of the most interesting researches I've had to embark on because when I did the literature review, I realized that there was not so much being said. There was a lot said about image-based sexual abuse, but how a sophisticated technology like deepfake enables this wasn't well addressed. So I thought this was an area that should be exploited. Someone needs to talk about this. So I collected data on image-based sexual abuse, and I realized that there were victims, popular victims, who had come out to speak. We had Kate Isaacs. She was the leader of an anti-porn campaign group, and there was 26 years old Northern Ireland politician called Cara Hunter as well, and Kate Isaacs was at the time dedicated her life research to regulating the porn industry. So when this happened, she was, in her opinion, she thought it was some sort of a revenge. She thought the motive behind this was to kind of punish her for her values, which is what she spoke to Jennifer Savin about at the BBC. Cara Hunter as well was one of the victims, and Cara Hunter, this happened just before she was elected to the Social Democratic and Labour Party assembly. And there was also Raya Ayob. Someone spoke about her already on the panel. She was an investigative journalist and an opinion columnist. But with Raya, it took the intervention of the UN to get her some help. And this kind of exposed the lackadaisical attitude to this. Because while we understand image-based sexual abuse, while we understand sexual abuse to be a menace, we don't really understand how much image-based sexual abuse can have even more terrifying impact on its victims, especially when backed by sophisticated technology like deepfakes. So at least with this, I was able to kind of understand how technology has, just like a tool, which technology really is just a tool. And like I always say, what makes technology good or bad is in whose hands this tool is wielded. And while deepfakes aren't exactly illegal in themselves, but when they're being manipulated this way, then they raise issues for concern, for worry. And this was what my research was mostly focused on. And of course, how we can kind of embrace a more holistic approach to regulation, calling on mostly a lot of collaborations, a lot of awareness. First of all, awareness, because it will shock you how many people are not even aware that this is happening. But if we can at least start with getting people aware that this is happening through platforms like this, like conferences like this, and kind of open up the awareness to the fact that their data can be manipulated and exploited without their consent and in the most drastic ways.
Thank you for that. Alessandra, one of the ways that I've been thinking about tech-facilitated violence, and I think you have too, is in its sort of epistemic or structural formations and how algorithms can produce and reinforce inequalities. And you recently authored a piece on this issue with respect to reproduction of gender inequality in the Brazilian music scene. And I wondered if you could tell us a bit about what your research showed.
So I would like to start with a brief context, because at least in Brazil, every time that we are doing some kind of research related to algorithm discrimination, we are always talking about race or gender discrimination, mostly related with some kind of violence. And with this project, we'd like to, what we were looking for was that maybe there's more than that. And when we started to look at the streaming music platforms, we started to look at how this kind of algorithm discriminations can also affect jobs and work opportunities related to discrimination based on gender. So what we did in this project. We looked at the two most popular music stream platforms in Brazil, that is Spotify and Deezer. We create a group of new users and put them during something between 3 or 4 months to listen only to recommended music, only the music that the platforms were recommended to them. And after this period, we collected the data that were recommended to all these new users and analyzed them. And we had a group of interesting findings, but I would like to point the main finding was that in all the cases, to every one of the new users that we create, and in all the situations, if you want to, after I can give more details about our methodology, but in all the scenarios, music songs from male artists were way more recommended than female artists. And when I say way more, I'm talking about double of the times. So if we had, considering 100% of the cases, 50% were composed by songs of male artists, and the other 50% of female artists, non-binary artists, and another group in Brazil that they also declared themselves as travestis, which is other particular group. So the other 50 were composed by them. And when we looked at this result, we could at first jump to the first conclusion that was, the platforms recommended way more male artist songs than female artists, and what this can affect to our artists, to the that this is the job, that's the work of the person, what financially this can the consequence of that. But we also consider other things to make our arguments and try to make better questions. The first is that we don't have access to numbers, to more exact numbers about what's the reality of these two platforms' databases. So we don't know if their databases are composed mostly more of male artists than female artists. So if that's the case, if the databases have way more male artists registered than female artists, so the platform is doing nothing about balance this database imbalance. That's one scenario. The other scenario is that considering that the database is balanced, so we have not exactly the same amount, but we have a really considering same amount of male and female artists. So the platform is doing something that is, the consequence is an imbalanced recommendation. So in each case, we have a problem that there is an imbalanced recommendation. There is some kind of discrimination that maybe is happening only on the execution of the algorithm or not, but nothing is actually being done, or a little is being done to try to balance this imbalance. That was our main finding. And a second finding, interesting finding, was related to the sequence of the songs. So each one of these new users, and I'm calling new users because we did not want to, the user that already had some kind of listen historical to not influence what was being recommended. So when we look to the sequence, each one of these new users, they were listen about 50 musics per day. It was something like 3 hours, or between 3 and 4 hours of songs each day. And when we look to sequence, we are considering, okay, this user is listening to this song now that is from male artist. The next song is again a song of a male artist. Oh, in the next song is again of a male artist. So when we call sequence, we are talking about that. So when we look to the sequence to see if there is some kind of balance in the sequence recommendation, we found that the biggest sequence of male artists were formed by 45 male artists. So this happened in some particular cases. It was not for all the users, but this happened. This was the biggest. And when we look to the biggest sequence of female artists, we have the bigger sequence formed by 8 female artists. So we have these really big discrepancy. And what is in Brazilian scene most interesting is that when we look to the biggest sequence of male artists, it's related to a musical genre that's called funk, that is mainly formed by male artists. So it's something that we may say that, okay, that's kind of expected because this musical genre is known as formed by I don't know, 80%, 90% of the artists in this genre is formed by male artists. But the second longest sequence, which was bigger than 40, was happened related to another genre that is popular Brazilian music, MPB, that is known to have a very equal number of female and male artists. So when we look at that, we thought, well, we don't believe that there is an imbalance of artists related to this musical genre in the data set. So here we believe that we have a problem on the recommendation system. And to finish here my talk, and when we look to the other groups, non-binary artists, and the travestis artists, they were less than 1% of the recommendations in every case. So that was, for the beginning, our results.
Yeah, so we thank you for that. So what we tried to do is give you a spectrum, because the extreme manifestations that we often hear about aren't part of a vacuum. They're part of a spectrum of behavior and violence, and that we enact and reinforce in society at large. So I think we have 5 minutes for questions if someone has a question. I know that if we want, I'm not sure if anybody's interested in regulation. That was something we were going to talk about. But yeah, please.
Hello. Thank you very much for the very informative panel. My name is Dustin Milligan. I'm a lawyer with the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. And I've come here really with the purpose of trying to advise journalists that I work with, I'm a media lawyer, on the dilemmas they may face in the future in relation to AI and or the advancement of AI. And one of the concerns I have is in relation to the future of deepfakes and the corroboration that's necessary to determine as to whether or not something's, an authentic video or audio recording. And the second, there's been a real proliferation of online harassment of journalists, and there's often a disproportionate impact on women and people of color in that process. And my question for the panel is, and this relates to Nora's research as well in relation to the journalist. Is there any advice that you would give journalists in light of your own experiences with AI and your research on deepfakes?
I can start with that one. So one of the places I'd really recommend going to, there's an organization called Witness. Sam Gregory does a lot of work in this area around how do you authenticate images, and a lot of authentication of images is in the same way that you would historically, right? Like making sure you've got good sources, making sure you've got all of those things. But they've got quite a few reports also looking at the difference between when is it appropriate to put up satirical deepfakes versus ones that are actually harmful. So I'd really recommend looking at Witness for information around deepfake detection and the role of journalists in determining what material is real and what material is not, especially in very fast-moving situations. So when we've seen deepfakes show up, it's often when there's a very fast-moving situation and someone hasn't done their research and put it up. And the harassment of journalists, right? Like that is, I wish I had answers for you. I do. There's been so much research just showing that and showing that it's really driving racialized people, women, queer, trans people out of journalism, both for just existing within the identity that they exist in. They're targeted in very specific ways to their marginalization, but also when they speak up about these issues. So if you're writing about racism, if you're writing about feminism, if you're writing about these things, you're targeted. If you meet up with me afterwards, I can give you some resources and research for people who are doing work in this area around it. Julia, I think it's Julia Passetti, I'd have to double check, has done a lot of great research on harassment of journalists.
Thank you.
Laura, did you want to?
Yeah, it's really complicated and it's really tough based on different jurisdictions that these journalists are based in. But what I believe that more advocacy work can be done with the governments. I know that from speaking to many journalists and human rights defenders, regardless of their status in the country they are based in, one of the main challenges is when they report the abusive content to the, whether to the law enforcement in their countries or even to the platforms, they are always being asked to make the attribution, especially when it's state-sponsored campaigns. Which is unrealistic and the government should listen to that, and also the platforms must listen to that. The context is very important, so more collaboration with the communities, with the individuals at risk is really needed. Also, the law enforcement should be trained to handle these issues. It's not impossible to take down these harmful content. It's not impossible to support the individuals at risk. It's not impossible for the states to engage in meaningful collaboration with the platforms to keep the discussion open and to collaborate with the targeted individuals and the communities. But I believe we need to start at some point. I know in the US, for instance, recently the FBI established the tip line for transnational oppression, a lot of criticism, but at least a baby step. Whereas in other countries, unfortunately, we are like the EU now, we are seeing the EU is shooting the freedom of expression and just rejected the passing of regulation against spyware, the use of spyware targeting journalists. So from different jurisdictions, we can learn a lot of lessons, but I believe we can start from opening the discussion, speaking about the challenges in particular, in details, and every platform can maybe develop its response in different way. And absolutely, AI is not the solution for content moderation. We always need a human oversight over the content moderation and more engagement with the targeted communities. Definitely more support for people at risk. It's not only about giving them digital security tips, but I really recommend anybody involving in advocacy working to advocate more for emotional and psychological support, groups that come together to tell the truth and to counter the argument, because the harm sometimes that could cause for some a journalist or in particular for freelancer people, that any potential or future employer would look at the content without seeking the truth online. And this is a huge debate around when people are looking at someone who's potential employee or a candidate for a job, are they looking for the truth or just looking for any random stuff? So I believe a lot of collaborative work, collective actions to counter the harmful actions is really needed. And we can continue this after the panel, for sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I see that there's a lineup. I've been given the wrap-up sign. So unfortunately, we'll have to continue the conversation in the corridors, in the breaks. Thanks everyone for your attention and your interest. Thank you to the panelists so much for your insight and your expertise. See you later, Chidera, hopefully sometime in person. Take care. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much, Jane, and your amazing team of panelists. It was an amazing conversation. I will kindly ask you to stay seated and give us just 1 minute to do the change of speakers, and we will move to our next session on AI and the environment. Thank you so much.